unaccustomed as I am. Oh my God. I actually haven't turned around since before the video started, so wasn't quite aware how many of us there are here today. And considering how many people wanted to be here and couldn't be here, it's really a tribute, I think, to what Harpal meant to so many people. My speech is going to be quite personal, of course also political, because as we know, you can't talk about Harpal separately from politics. Even as a father, he was political. But of course, I am here remembering my father, as well as my mentor and my party leader. Before I start, though, I want to say two things. One of them is, please take a copy of Lalkar. There's a free one for everybody here, and it has his obituary in it. And I think you will all enjoy it, those of you who haven't seen it already. And the other one is, I really hope as many of you as possible will join us later. We're going to be at the Prince of Wales Feathers on Warren Street, which is literally around the corner. And essentially this is our wake for Harpal, because those of you who know about his passing know that he died in Punjab, and we cremated him the same evening that he died in his home village. And so there was no funeral here, no wake here. So tonight is the wake, and we hope that some of you will join us and give him a fitting British send-off. He's had his Indian send-off, but this is the British one. So I hope you can stick around and join us and raise a glass down the pub, as we like to say. You know, it's only when someone comes to the end of their life, and particularly when that person is your father, and they're just always there, whether good, bad, or terrible, they're there. And you don't particularly think about how your parents get to be there, because they're just the wallpaper, the furniture of the world that you arrive into. But being with him when he died in India and going back to the village that I hadn't really been to since my grandmother died, I hadn't been there since 1979, to the farm where my dad was born and grew up. I spent 2 long holidays there as a small child, and then never saw it again because the family centre moved. And going back to that farm really brought it home to me, not just how Harpal's life travelled full circle, but how far he moved from where he started, and how phenomenal his life really was. How extraordinary it was that someone like him came from that place and that time. Many things informed that, but it was an amazing thing to see. But it also made me think about the impact of the village in shaping him. I think he was very keen to leave many aspects of village life behind him, and would be very dismissive about all the things that are annoying about living in a close, small community. But you know, looking at his whole life, it seemed to me that the village gave him vigour and strength, his immense ability to keep track of people, his brilliance at maintaining human contacts. Again, only after he died did I discover just how many people he had an ongoing relationship with right to the very end of his days. And he was one of the few people I know who loved the mobile phone unconditionally, because of the way that he could call people all over the world anytime he wanted to. And he did. He wasn't one of us, you know, later generations who become phone avoiders, just taking refuge in text messages and feeling too busy. He was someone who really appreciated human contact, and who kept in human contact with a huge number of people. Huge numbers of political people in Britain, in the party, but also in the movement internationally, but also family members and friends. And, you know, I discovered he had separate relationships with all kinds of people, ongoing right to the end, that I had no clue that he was maintaining to that point. It was quite phenomenal. And of course his memory was legendary. And I truly believe that his memory was a bequest to him from a life in an oral culture, in the village. He grew up with stories. He grew up around people who were illiterate. His own mother was illiterate. This is also hard to imagine. This person who is famed through the world as some kind of a professor, as a leading theoretician, came from a family where his mother never learned to read and write, and his father never went to school past the age of 11. It is phenomenal. He had the opportunity to be educated, and he took it with both hands. His early experiences, I think, really had a lot to do with how he turned out. Ranjit talked about the impact of partition, and like him, I only looked at the map properly really recently to understand how close he was to that bloodline that was ripped through Punjab when the British left, and he was just this 7-8-year-old boy, what it did to his family and his world. But he also talked to us about the coming of tractors. And, again, Dad wasn't the most hands-on person. You didn't think of him that way, but as well as riding horses and stealing horses, stealing the fastest horse without permission and falling off it, he would watch the tractors and see what they did. And he used to talk to me about how a tractor was a valuable thing, and his family had enough money to own a tractor. When the tractor needed repair, someone had to go with it and keep an eye on the mechanic, that he wasn't messing with what he was supposed to be doing, wasn't giving you bad parts or stealing bits or whatever. So he would go as a young boy when the tractor was being repaired and sit and watch the mechanic for hours, what he was up to. So, he had a real, first-hand knowledge of things that are of really vital importance to ordinary people, and how the world works. And right in the last 10 days I was with him of his life, he was declining very rapidly. But before he lost the ability to speak to us, one of the things he said to me was, I've seen 3 social systems in my lifetime: feudalism, capitalism, and socialism. The first 2 weren't so great. But I think the impact of seeing what feudal village life meant for his mother in particular, I think that never left him. His mother, who was essentially the chief servant in his father's household, with no status of her own, no agency, no ability to do the tiniest thing for herself, right down to the fact that for years she suffered pain constantly, daily, of an ingrowing eyelash, because nobody thought it was important enough to get a doctor to her, and they had money to get a doctor. It wasn't considered important, and she didn't have the ability to sort that out for herself. Such a small thing. So little power in her own life. And that, I guess, brings me to my childhood. One of the things I really appreciated about Dad, and appreciate more the older I get, is how he never treated me like a girl. Neither in the feudal sense, nor even in the sense of a lot of my friends, fathers in Britain. In 70s Britain and 80s Britain, there were still plenty of families where the dad was the lord and master of the house, and particularly the daughters, had to do as they were told and dress the right way and act the right way. And Dad was never like that at all with me. It never really made me feel like, girls were different from boys, except that girls don't get a thupper. That's one of these, which I was fine with. But I was very grateful for the wide exposure I had in my childhood to all kinds of things. And I was conscious that my friends in Hertfordshire, where I was growing up, weren't exposed to the same things I was being exposed to in terms of places, people, classes, and ideas. And I always remember when Dad went to the liberation celebrations in Zimbabwe, would be 80, 81? So I was 8 years old, and obviously my parents were talking about it. Presumably it was in the British news, but who knows whether anyone around me had any idea this was even going on. And my dad went to Zimbabwe, and it was exciting in our house that Dad had gone to Zimbabwe. And I told my primary school teacher, my dad's gone to Zimbabwe. And then I capped it off by saying, Robert Mugabe came to my house. Which was a true thing. I met him, I don't remember it, I was 2. I don't remember meeting him, but I'd been told that I'd met him. And I told my teacher, and he's looking at me like I was speaking Swahili. He must have thought I was mental. But we also had a good dose of revolutionary morality in our house. You know, people used to ask me, oh, you know, well, it's inevitable you're going to become a communist, isn't it? If your father's a communist, your mother's a communist, surely that's why you're a communist. Well, obviously, to some extent, yes, that is why I'm a communist. I was exposed to those ideas. But my parents, neither of them, tried to make me be a communist. But of course, I was around ideas. And one of the ways those ideas made their way into our minds and our hearts was through children's literature that we got from the Soviet Union, and especially from People's China. I had many children's storybooks from People's China, which I loved. And if you saw them in my house, you'd know how much I loved them, because they've fallen to pieces. And I've got a fair bit of 6-year-old kind of graffiti on them as well. But they really, I think, had more of an influence on how our minds developed as we grew up than we perhaps realized at the time. And of course, we were exposed to somebody who took these questions seriously. You know, my dad, when he was at home, which was, to be honest, not that much, when he was there, he had a study and it was full of books, and he read and he wrote. And so that was a background to my life, was that if you care about something, you look into it and you dedicate yourself to it. And to own the complete works of Marx and Engels is not an easy thing, because they're sold at academic prices. They're not sold at working class prices. And every volume was precious to my dad, and he didn't have the money to go and buy a complete set. Like he gifted to me, when I turned 50, a complete set of Marx and Engels, and if you look it up on the internet, you'll see that's not a small gift, that's a massive gift. It costs a lot of money. But he collected them over the years, and I remember every birthday and every Christmas for years and years, my mum would give him 2 more volumes of Marx and Engels' collected works, you know, and this was a real long-term labour. And I grew up seeing that and understanding that that was something that my parents took very, very seriously. And the other thing I appreciated about him, I appreciated at the time and even more now, that he wasn't coercive, not with ideas, not with the clothes I wore or the things that I did. One of the stories I used to use to illustrate this was the question of my smoking. Like a teenage fool, I took up smoking age 15, thinking that was a good rebellion. And my dad found out because he came to visit us. My parents had split up by this point. He came to visit us, and he put on his coat, which had become my coat. He left it behind, and I liked it. And as a teenager, I thought it was pretty cool. And I used to wear his coat. And he went for a walk with my mum and came back, and he'd found a pack of cigarettes in the pocket. And he said to me, "Joti, promise me you'll never smoke again." And I went, "No." And that was the end of it. And in fact, in the years to come, the 10 more years when I was a full-time smoker, he took to buying me cigarettes whenever he was in duty-free. And he would say to me, "Well, I don't like your smoking, but it's a very expensive habit and you can't afford it." And he was, you know, as a teenager, I was angry about the fact that he wasn't like the other dads. And that's a standard response, I think, of all children who have parents who are not quite, you know, average. I mean, if you're average, you moan about something else. But for me, it was very much the fact that he wasn't around enough. He didn't play cricket in the back garden. He didn't do the things he was supposed to do. He almost never turned up to any of my concerts where I was playing the violin. He always had something else to do. You know, it made me feel cross, but as I got older, you know, I came to appreciate that he wasn't just absent because he didn't care. He was absent because he had something important to do. And I also came to appreciate that he really was what the proverb says, a friend in need. A friend in need is a friend indeed, as they used to tell us. And he really was a friend in need. Whenever you really, really needed something, whether it was someone to cheer you up with a joke, which he was brilliant at doing, whether you needed, Ranjit talked about, or Maisel talked about when Ranjit was suffering racism in school and how important Dad was to Ranjit at that time. For me, it came much later. I had a very long journey trying to have children that took 10 years and took me through many, many ups and downs of infertility treatment that Dad helped me with. And then when I finally did get pregnant, I had terrible pregnancies. It was so disheartening to have wanted all these years to be pregnant and then finally to be pregnant and to be sick as a dog. 3 times in a row as well, 3 pregnancies running. I was really, really sick, spent most of them in bed. It was absolutely miserable. And Dad would ring me up every single day just to take my mind off it, tell me stories, tell me jokes, talk to me about something and just lift my mood. And he did lift my mood. And when my second baby, many of you will know, he died. He died during childbirth. It was a really terrible loss, the like of which I had never known up to that point. And in fact, I think it's a sign of what an easy life most of us have these days, that I hadn't known terrible loss until that day, and I was 37. And I was surprised to find how the person who seemed to feel that loss the most, in a grief-stricken whole family, of course, was my dad. And he really felt it. He was amazingly moved by it, deeply, deeply grieved, and again rang me every single day, probably for more than a year, to, make sure I was okay, to talk to me, to just, he was there. He was there. And that's something that I will really, really miss. I'm very grateful for the values that I learned growing up in a house with him and my mum: generosity, hospitality, dedication, discipline, love of knowledge, perseverance, optimism, that Jill said, faith in humanity, the understanding that there are things in the world that are more important than yourself, and the necessity of doing what is right, not necessarily what is popular or what is easy. Like I said, I'll really miss his jokes. I hope that I've learned enough from him to carry on where he left off when it comes to understanding how to prioritize, what to worry about, what not to worry about, what to do when there's too much to do. I will miss his advice and support in a crisis. What I will really, really miss, and there's never going to be a replacement for this, we just got to learn to do it ourselves somehow, but his ability to respond quickly to anything political that I wanted to ask him. If I had an article that I'd written, I would send it to Harpal, and I would know that he would spot anything stupid that I'd said or done. And the same when I started to do interviews online. It's not a medium I feel very comfortable with. It's very anxiety-inducing because you could easily, in the heat of the moment, say something stupid and it's out there forever. I really don't like that. I much prefer writing. But the world is changing and we have to put our message across and take the opportunities that are there. And it was agreed, I constantly say to my party, is this useful? Is this useful? So yes, it's useful. So I keep doing it. But it was very reassuring to me that Harpal would always prioritise watching every one of those that I did and call me up afterwards to tell me what he thought. And that 99% of the time, what he thought was great. Every now and again, he'd say, "You forgot to finish your point." I was like, "Yeah, I know. I went off on a tangent and got lost." But the fact that he was paying such close attention and would tell you if something was wrong meant that if he told you it was good, you could feel reassured that you hadn't done anything stupid, because he would definitely have spotted it if you had. And all of us all of us are going to miss his deep and irreplaceable well of knowledge, the product of 60 years of deep, deep, deep study. He leaves a big hole for all of us, comrades, friends, and family. And we're just going to have to work together to fill it. Carlos mentioned his deep understanding of the connection between anti-imperialism and socialism. You know, he began his life understanding that imperialism must be fought. And in looking for the answers to how you do that, he came to understand that it's only socialism that finally can defeat imperialism. That's why he became a communist. He knew, absolutely knew, here, he knew with total conviction there is no other way. He knew you can't be an anti-imperialist in an imperialist country without being a communist. You're just playing at opposing imperialism if you're not building the party of the working class. He knew that. He passed that on to us. His love of the Indian revolutionary slogan is what I'm going to finish with. He really, throughout his life and throughout his work, approached everything with, as Keith said, absolutely indomitable spirit. And I hope that he has infused enough of that into our party and into us, his children, and us, his friends, his comrades, his family, that we will go forward also with indomitable spirit and also continue with the slogans of the Indian as well as the British working classes on our lips. Inqilab Zindabad.